Welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. Las Vegas Grand Prix 2025 gonna be remembered as potentially the major changing point in 2025 Drivers' Championship. Joe Samaniego here, along with Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight. Big thank you to our Patreon investors calling the show: Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Plus the newest member, Crystal. Investing in the Grid Network through Patreon. Link in the video description. You can also submit super chat. Buy me a coffee. We'll thank you on the air. And subscribe. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss all of our programs right here for Grid Tonight, especially as we get ready for 2026. But before we get to 2026, we have to finish up 2025 and Kobe. The 2025 Drivers' Championship, a dramatic turn of events. But it did not happen as we anticipated because, as always, Las Vegas Grand Prix, sold out crowd under the lights. This is what Las Vegas is all about. This is what Formula One has been wanting for a long time here in the United States. Sold out crowd. You even had Micky Mouse directing the water show at the Bellagio Hotel. Fireworks all over the sky, a drone show, and the grand spectacle that is Formula One at the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. But then at 1:45 a.m. Pacific time, Kobe, that's 4:45 for you, Eastern, we were both up following this. Matt White from the Grid Endurance Performance Index, of course, based out of the United Kingdom, was following it as well. Double disqualification for McLaren. Lando Norris, second place finish, gone. Oscar Piastri, fourth place finish, gone. Excessive wear of the wooden plank is generally a straightforward penalty. Costly penalty for both drivers and their championship hunt. The plank wear requirement is 9 millimeters. Both cars were at 8.88 and 8.93 on the right side of that plank. Andrea Stella, in a statement, said both cars experienced high level of porpoising. This effect was not seen in practice and qualifying, and McLaren is investigating the matter. But outrage from McLaren fans and many on this penalty is being heard globally, Kobe. We are seeing the term papaya fools. People calling on somebody in the McLaren organization to potentially be held accountable and potentially lose their job. And some are even questioning Zach Brown, the grand leader of it all, and his ability to lead a championship effort. Is this statement of unexpected porpoising a valid explanation of what happened? Or is it a cop-out? And McLaren should have never been in the position to risk disqualification.
I mean, Joe, we talk about perfect timing, in certain things, and this couldn't have happened at the worst possible time. This was the opposite of perfect timing. As McLaren, they did not need this to happen at all. This was the absolute worst possible time for McLaren to have a massive screw up, and I'm sure the rule they violated this, and we've been on these shows before. We've seen cars fail post-race inspection, in Formula One in this case, and in previous times it was a disqualification. So once we found out what it was, if we knew which way that was leaning, there's typically a disqualification. This is exactly what happened to Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, throwing away, valuable points, especially from Lando's end, who's currently leading the Drivers' Championship. It really seemed like, that after this race had ended, although Lando screwed up the start, excuse me. Although Lando screwed up the start of the race, he was still able to, recover and get, really good points. And he was looking good heading into the final two races at Qatar and Abu Dhabi. But the team just really let him down, let Oscar Piastri down. I think in this situation, instead of making excuses, you really need to hold yourself accountable. Stella in leadership at McLaren, they have to hold themselves accountable for this, even if they aren't necessarily at fault, because you want to see that type of leadership. Even if I didn't cause this or that, you have to be like, yeah, that's on me. We should have made sure, that something like this could have never happened, especially, under these circumstances, because this is a high pressure situation right now. Like this year's championship, it should have been a layup for McLaren, given how strong they've been all year. It should have been an easy layup. Like they stole the basketball at the half court line and just laid it up. It should have been that easy. And it's really on them that they've let Max Verstappen stay in the championship fight this long. They should have eliminated Max from championship condition weeks ago, many races ago. Yeah, but Max is right in the thick of it right now, tied with Oscar Piastri in points. And all it takes is one bad race. The only thing that could happen in Qatar, you could see both McLaren drivers retire. Max Verstappen wins the race, and he's leading the championship by a single point, I believe. So Max Verstappen in just one race, he could flip the script just like that. All it takes is just one bad race within the next two for Oscar or Orlando, and Max, just remain perfect right at the end of the season. And then Red Bull could very well steal this championship at the buzzer. But yeah, I think that McLaren has a lot of answering to do. I'm sure they're going to do a full and thorough investigation to try to figure out what happened. But this is, this could potentially be the start, as we've been saying on previous shows, Joe, one of the all-time worst choke jobs or collapses in not just Formula One history, but in the history of motorsports. I can't think of a single time where, you seem like one team had the drivers' championship in the bag, and then they just completely blew it at the end. And if we get to the event that Max Verstappen becomes a 5-time Formula One world champion, kind of like we see in Stick and Balls for it, I think McLaren needs to clean house. I think Zach Brown, Andrea Stella, all the people you see in leadership. I don't say this stuff, lightly, since I know, everyone has lives that will be affected and all of that. But if McLaren loses its championship to Max Verstappen, I think that you need to clean house and you need to kick people out of leadership and, find new leaders who are not gonna, choke at the end of the season like this.
It's one thing to build a team from where they were 10 years ago at the bottom and building it better and better to get to that top level. But when you're at that top level, the stakes are different. The pressure is intense. A good day is not just, hey, we got a podium. It's, we need to finish. We're expected to. Compared to where they were long ago, where, hey, we just want to score points. They're supposed to go out there and get these wins to fight not just for the championship, to fight Max Verstappen for the championship. And this is where I believe there's a great amount of frustration that are seeing on social media and to many. Because I cannot imagine the response from Lando and Oscar when they were told about the disqualifications. 7 races ago, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, they completed the Dutch Grand Prix. Oscar Piastri had a 309 points totally accumulated. He was 34 points ahead of Lando Norris. 104 points behind Oscar Piastri was Max Verstappen, with a brand new team principal after Christian Horner got fired. So many people, just about everyone, thought it was over. Oscar had 7 wins, a podium in every race except Canada, where he finished 4th, and Australia, 9th place finish. So still, perfect point scoring record. Lando Norris had 5 wins, but 2 races with no points scored. Max Verstappen only had 2 wins, 6 podiums, and 1 retirement at Austria, the Red Bull Ring, a track Red Bull is known for success. But since that Dutch Grand Prix, 7 races later, only 1 podium, and now 2 Grand Prix where Oscar Piastri did not score any points. Lando Norris, 2 wins. So in that 7 race window, podium in every race except Azerbaijan, the Baku Street City Circuit, and now Las Vegas. And again, you have Max Verstappen. Podium in every race with 4 wins and 6 total of the year. 1 behind Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. McLaren has choked away their advantage to Max Verstappen and Red Bull. And give credit to Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Mercedes and Ferrari had the same opportunities to try to catch up, but they have not capitalized as much as Max Verstappen and that Red Bull team. And McLaren, what were they doing? Papaya rules supposedly means equal treatment for both drivers. But when you have a championship leading driver in Oscar Piastri struggling since Azerbaijan and no sign of help, your second place driver erases and closes in on that championship lead of Oscar Piastri. But during that time period, Max Verstappen has scored more points in the Italian Grand Prix, Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Singapore Grand Prix, and the United States Grand Prix at Circus of America, mounting a comeback. McLaren, so fixated on equal treatment, told Oscar to give up second place to Lando Norris in Italy because of a slow pit stop. And now, your once championship leading driver is tied with Max Verstappen, and potentially is going to lose that position, potentially even a tiebreaker if it all comes down to it. Lando Norris is now one DNF away from losing the lead. Max Verstappen is defending winner of the Qatar Grand Prix, the next race weekend, where he could sweep this Grand Prix and sprint race weekend. And when he needs to, he knows how to win at Abu Dhabi. What's behind McLaren's choke of 2025? Is it the inability of leadership to say Oscar won the Dutch Grand Prix? 10 races are remaining. He's getting the preferred treatment. Is that too hard to say for the leadership there? Is it the contract situation where both drivers clearly do not want to be that number 2 driver? Is it Andrea Stellis cracking under the pressure and rumored to be going to another team? Or is it even just Oscar Piastri, who is not performing at the level we saw before the Dutch Grand Prix? We asked our colleagues at the Grid Network, is this the biggest choke in professional sports? Our very own Ben Schneider from LastCar.info and the Ben Schneider Show has said this is beyond the 28-3 comeback in Super Bowl 51. Matt White from the Grid Endurance Performance Index compared this to 2007, when McLaren allowed Kimi Räikkönen to steal the championship when Fernando Alonso and a young Lewis Hamilton lost grounds due to their infighting and mistakes. But there was also the 2007 Spygate scandal involving McLaren that resulted in disqualification from the year, and Alonso left for Renault. 17 years later, Kobe, the same organization is now allowing Max Verstappen the opportunity to claim his 5th consecutive championship, tying Michael Schumacher for 5 consecutive championships, and tying Juan Manuel Fangio for 5 championships. Can McLaren stop the failures, and is it now damage control mode for McLaren?
Well, given how things are going, Joe, I hate to say it, for all the papaya fans out there, but it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. Even if McLaren ends up pulling off this driver's title with Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris, who's currently leading the championship, you still can't. I mean, you can celebrate, all you want, because winning world championships in Formula One is very difficult. Yeah, and you don't know when you'll have the opportunity to do it again. So by all means, if Lando or Oscar end up pulling off, they should celebrate and be happy. But you can't be, even if you do win, you can't really be happy with how you won. Kind of like, I know people don't like using stick and ball sports example. At this point, it's kind of like getting an ugly win. Like it's like I won 20-17 or whatever at a last second field goal, but we played horrific. Like we played a really ugly and sloppy game. So many things went wrong. Execution is not there. You're not, playing complement. You're not performing in a complimentary manner, and it's just completely ugly. But you still end up winning, the granddaddy of them all at the end of the day. So yes, it's a good result, but you still can't feel really happy with everything that you've done. And Joe, you asked a lot of really good questions about what's behind, McLaren, completely falling apart down the stretch, because this should have been the year of McLaren. This should have been the year where they took control of Formula One with Lando and Oscar, and just completely run away with this championship. But yet, despite all the issues going on, the biggest thing is I think McLaren is they're beating themselves, because they're really taking themselves out of the equation here. And they better hope, time runs off the clock here. They better hope that they make it through the Qatar Grand Prix and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix unscathed and ahead of Max Verstappen. because if they have any slip ups, just even a tiniest slip up, Max is going to be there, and he's going to take advantage. And as we've learned from Max in the last few years, he's really good at playing those mind games, and I think that he can use that to his advantage down the stretch. And I think that's why you saw Lando Norris at the start of the race try to take an aggressive move on Max, because Max is going to be aggressive, so he tried to outmax Max and end up screwing himself, because if Lando Norris had a perfect start and got out front, he probably would have won the Las Vegas Grand Prix. But it's probably actually a good thing that he didn't, because he would have been disqualified anyways, and Max would have ended up winning the race as he did. And looking at some of the questions you asked, Joe, you asked, is the inability of leadership, to say that after Oscar, won the Dutch Grand Prix, that he should get the preferred treatment. I'm sure a lot of people can debate that back and forth. As you know, Joe, the papaya rules, is really complicated. I know in Formula One, you want to see, the drivers be able to race each other and all of that. But you also have to wonder if, at the point Oscar was in control of the championship, should they have, given him priority? And obviously we're never going to know the answer to that question. And I know I see a lot of Australian fans of Oscar Piastri. I've read their comments on social media. They're very upset. They feel like that Lando Norris is a favorite of McLaren, and that Oscar, is just, not he's not getting the preferred treatment from the team. And if you're watching the Formula One pre-race show on Sky Sports F1, they were interviewing Oscar before the race, and you could tell he kind of just shrugged his shoulders and like, it is what it is. And as our own Matthew Bro said, like at some point, when all this is settled, the fall of Oscar Piastri in the year 2025 needs to be studied, because I've never seen a driver who was seemingly in control of the championship just completely fall apart down the stretch. And we were praising him during the first half of the season, especially our own Tanner Smith here. We're talking about how Oscar was cool, calm, and collective, and how he really seemed like that he was the guy this year. And now it seemed like he's completely flipped the script in a negative manner, and that he's not that guy that we thought he was. That was potentially just fool's gold from Oscar Piastri. And it's just been really crazy to see him just fall apart from a performance standpoint down the stretch. And I really do wonder what has happened to Oscar, because he was really killing it early on in the season, and now he's gone ice cold. It really seemed like that he's peaked too soon, in many respects. And you also asked, about the contract situation where both drivers don't want to be the number two. And I think Oscar, possibly can, but given the dynamics of the team and all of that, since I guess you could argue that both of them are number one drivers, when you try to have two number ones on the same team, it can get really messy. Maybe at some point, when the contract is up, we may see one of them try to leave, the organization, and where they can be a number one driver on another team. And Andrea Stella, him, Zach Brown, the leaders of this team, they very well could be, cracking under pressure, and things, are that they're missing within the team that's really hurting them down the stretch. And we know there's some rumors that Andrea Stella could be potentially going to a new team. And, given the way this championship might end, that might be for the best thing, actually, if McLaren end up blowing this. But yeah, getting back to the question you asked, I don't really see McLaren stopping the failures at this point, and they have to try to do damage control the best way that they possibly can, because they basically need time to run out. They basically need the clock to go down to all zeros, to end up closing out this championship, because given what we've seen in the last handful of races in the second half of the season, they very well could blow this, and it's going to, be a very, very sad, and bad day, back in the United Kingdom if McLaren blows this championship. I just can't imagine what that would even be like. Even right now, you hope, for their sake and sanity, that they can pull it off. But Joe, can you imagine on our wrap-up show in just a couple of weeks' time, we're talking about Max Verstappen, 5-time Formula One world champion, McLaren drivers led the entire championship from beginning until almost the end, and then they blew it in the last race. Could you imagine what all the headlines would be like?
The headlines, it will be about the collapse of the McLaren year, to start the season with a Lando Norris win and to end the year with a Max Verstappen championship. But they led every single week except one. A lot of people, we talk about the strength of a full season championship, but if there's one thing I have to say, and this is what I think is part of that damage control, sort of that frustration, is the fact that As you said very well, Kobe, about they're running the clock down. They're just in that mode. They just have to survive. Why couldn't they close the deal? What happened to put themselves in this situation? The one thing I kept thinking about was this penalty, was the fact that this was for the ride height. Go back one couple weeks ago to Brazil, and you look at the McLaren cars compared to the Red Bull cars, the Mercedes cars at Brazil. They were just a little bit more higher off the ground than their competitors. This was part of the reason why Oscar Piastri had struggled a bit, especially in that sprint race where he crashed. They were a little bit conservative, but they still had the fastest car. This is an organization where in Formula One, you have to test the limits. You have to be right at the limit. I am not a team principal. There's no way I could be a team principal. But if there's one thing, even if we're talking about this championship picture, right now, after this disqualification, still, if Lando Norris gets second place in every race, that's a 15 points loss, but not 24. He will still get that championship. They should just even look at, hey, we just got to make sure we come here with points. If that means a little sacrifice in the speed, it might be worth it. We're talking tiny millimeters of a difference between getting those points and being disqualified. For an organization that is so used to pushing the limits, they just push a little too far. And there's one thing I will say, I recall in that statement that they don't know. We got to remember, we had wet conditions during the practice sessions. We didn't exactly have long run periods because we even had red flags because of a loose manhole cover, which didn't destroy anybody's car, but definitely interrupted the session. This is one of those deals where McLaren dropped the ball. And at the end of the day, I will be interested to see how McLaren will respond. Are they going to be a little too conservative? Because that could easily go into favor of Max Verstappen. Right now, Max Verstappen is that team that all offense, nothing to lose. Because at the end of the day, you brought the fight back. Now, all they could do, you can't call a timeout, McLaren. All you could do is just hope the time runs out for them and you survive. That's going to be a very intense 3 weeks. 3 races, 2 weeks for them. In the chat room, is Max Verstappen going to steal the F1 Drivers' Championship away from McLaren? It very well could happen. And McLaren better do A+ work in the next 2 races to hang on to that Drivers' Championship. Well, Kobe, Qatar, Verstappen is the defending winner. But that track layout supposedly will favor the McLaren drivers. This is very early, uncharted territory, but if we were to be, for some reason, locking in our pick of winners right now, would you be leaning to a McLaren driver or would you be leaning towards Verstappen? I can tell you for me, I'm leaning Verstappen.
Yeah, I would certainly be leaning Max Verstappen as well. We've seen how he performs, down the stretch. I don't care what they say about McLaren. These final 2 tracks favoring them. It all comes down to execution at the end of the day. And like I kept mentioning at the start of the race, Lando Norris failed to execute a perfect start. And a lot of times in these Formula One races, I almost like 9 times out of 10, whoever gets the lead at the start usually ends up winning the race more times than not. And that was the moment Lando Norris lost the race. And you can have a whole bunch of things happen. You can, you can miss the start right there, and miss out on your opportunity right from the get-go. You can have a mechanical issue that causes you to retire from the car. And you saw at the end of the race, Joe, a lot of people, overlooked this, but Lando Norris was having a major issue with the car at the very end. If this race had been like 5, 6, 7 laps longer, he might have had to retire the car, and that's always something that you have to have in the back of your mind. And then always, it could be like the start of the race where you have someone try to be a hero like Gabriel Bortoleto and then, acts as a bowling ball and then, just wipes you out. And that could very well happen, in Abu Dhabi and Qatar, where someone else's, mistake end up becoming your biggest headache. So you have to worry about other people, potentially putting themselves into this equation, unintentionally. So there's just a lot of different factors, that McLaren drivers, have to face it. But if I were McLaren heading to these final two races, given that Lando has a 24-point lead over Max and Oscar, I'm sure the Aussies, our Aussie viewers and the Oscar fans out there, I'm sorry guys, but if I'm McLaren, I'm prioritizing Lando right now because he is leading the drivers' championship. I know that's not easy to hear if you're an Oscar fan or all of that, but right now, looking strictly at this from a business perspective, I feel like that if you are truly serious about not choking away this championship, you need to put all of your eggs, in Lando's basket right now to try to make sure that he can get the job done since he is leading the championship. And then everything after that, in regards to Oscar, just let the cars, fall where they may. If Lando has an issue and Oscar's in position, to be the new lead guy, then you prioritize Oscar. But right now, I would be leaning Team Lando if I'm McLaren to make him the number one for these last two races. But I would certainly, rather be Max Verstappen right now because right now the McLaren, they have to be on defense, and Max, he can just pressure them and just completely be on offense. It's certainly going to be an exciting end to this year's Formula One season. And Joe, something else that I said earlier, I wanted to hear your opinion on this. So if McLaren do end up winning the drivers' championship with either one of their drivers, do you also agree with me when I say that although you win, you can't be happy how you won because of how ugly it was to get there? I know they're going to be happy, but not completely happy. On one hand, I'm happy that we won, but on the other hand, I'm so disgusted at how awful it looked to get there.
The word that I think they will feel when either Oscar or Lando crosses the finish line at Abu Dhabi and they hear you are the 2025 Formula One Drivers' Champion, number one word is relief, because they just held on. And they may go back to the podium. They will celebrate. Of course they'll celebrate. The team will celebrate. They'll have the number one. This will be a story they'll remember of how they almost lost it, but they held on to get that win. It'll be a great story, but a big sigh of relief that we did it. And you beat Max Verstappen. That will, I think, be the common feeling. It's not going to be the same as we were so good all year, which they have. 7 wins. That's impressive. But the fact that they could have been even just that much more better, it's like getting a sloppy win. It's the same as there was a team doing a comeback, but they just ran out of time, or that extra point, that field goal attempt, that free throw, missed. And you are now the champion. That is the relief I think they're going to be feeling if they claim the driver's championship. But it got to be perfect. And I'm glad you brought up about the fuel. Could you imagine if, for some reason, the race was a little longer? And let's not forget, we had 2 virtual safety car periods. The start of the race, and then I believe another one for debris. If we didn't have those periods where the car slowed down, would Lando even have enough fuel just for the sample? Because we know that's another disqualification. If you don't have the sample slot for the FIA, you're in trouble. So McLaren dodged a bullet with that, but my goodness, they cannot afford dodging more bullets when there's a sprint race where we've seen the 2 McLarens crash into each other at Coda, a track where Max Verstappen is the defending winner, and then another track where Max Verstappen has won out every year except last year, but last year he already had the championship clinched. He probably was just out on a cruise. So I think, as Adam said in that chat room, it has to be A+ effort, no mistakes. But so often that's when the pressure comes and there are mistakes. So it'll be fascinating to see how the McLaren duo handles the next couple of race weekends, because the championship, that is, of course, is the big picture. That's going to be the story that's going to dominate the 2025 Las Vegas Grand Prix, the McLaren double disqualifications. But we still had a race with plenty of stories in the field. Of course, Verstappen won from the start, as you mentioned, Kobe. An aggressive start by Lando Norris to try to block him. But then he messed up his entry into that first corner, lost the lead, lost second place even, got around George Russell on pace much later in the race. We had that early virtual safety car for the debris cleanup in turn 1, Gabriel Borratello colliding, causing a couple cars to spin, including himself. But the thing that I think got a lot of people also in a controversy, but it got overshadowed easily, the field came into turn 1, and we saw several marshals running back to their safety posts off the track. Have we not learned from Mexico City what happened there with that close call with the one marshal? Now we have several marshals out there. We also saw during the F1 Academy race weekend, that first race when Maya Wu crashed on the formation lap. And the field was coming around, and they were still trying to maneuver that tractor around to remove Maya Wu's car. Kobe, like I said, haven't we learned from Mexico City or Japan, where we have wet, rainy conditions, a tractor on the track, and Pierre Gasly zooming by with poor visibility? I mean, the tragedy in Japan years before, we thought was the moment that, okay, we have to change how we're doing this. Why are we still having these mistakes?
I honestly have no idea, Joe. And I think in our private chat, I was one of the first ones who brought this up. And, I was livid. You saw how upset I was about that, because I know how this could have ended in tragedy. And I'm sure they're going to investigate this like they did, in Mexico. But I guess it's not going to really do much. I guess we're just going to have to mess around until, someone gets killed. That's probably the only thing that's going to change this situation. And we, on our programs, we always thank the marshals, for what they do, because without the marshals, we wouldn't be able to race, because they volunteer their time and do such an amazing job, to make sure that everything goes smoothly during the race. And whenever there's debris, pick it up, so the drivers can continue on with the action. So we really appreciate what our marshals do. And that's exactly why we want to make sure that we can protect them at all costs. And whatever was going on, during the Las Vegas Grand Prix last night, that was totally unacceptable and inexcusable. And race control, I don't know what they were thinking in that situation. There was obviously some type of miscommunication between race control and the marshals, because Joe, when I was watching this live, I was very alarmed what I was seeing. Like, I'm seeing the cars, I see the cars, they're going at full speed, and all of a sudden I see people running across the track. I'm like, what on earth is going on here? I'm like, that's just, just absolutely terrible. Thankfully, they were, far enough down to get, where the cars, if they didn't have an issue, they were going to be able to get by. But, that besides the point. Like speaking hypothetically here, what if somebody had a brake failure, heading down into the turn, right? Into turn 1. Like, what if they had a brake failure, then they just then it goes straight to the floor. They're, then they just slide completely off course, and then the marshals don't have enough time to run, and then you see a horrible tragedy unfold on television. And, that's something you definitely don't want to see at all. And I feel like we need to do whatever we can to minimize, those issues where everything is communicated in a proper manner. The marshals can run out the track, do their thing, and before the cars come back, get off the racing surface, so we don't have, a tragedy unfold and see someone get killed. That would be really horrible to see something like that happen. And I do remember, the Japan incident that happened, with Pierre Gasly a few years ago, and then obviously what happened a few weeks ago in Mexico City, with Liam Lawson. When Liam was, Liam was on a hot track, and then you see marshals up there, and then I thought it was really awful of how Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, basically came out with a statement and blamed Liam Lawson for the incident, which I thought was, really a real disgusting thing to say. Although I know they want to protect their people and all that, so I get that, but I didn't think it was fair for them to say that was Liam's fault, when it was clearly the fault of Formula One for not realizing what the situation was. But Joe, like I say, I hate to say it, but I don't think we're going to learn anything until somebody gets killed.
It's very tragic that seems to be the way it's going, that until something really bad happens, we learn. This is something race control just has to say, take a step back. It's like, we have to do better. They have the rules of a full safety car. Just better communication. We're going to have 2 laps to clean up debris, so get all the marshals off the track, let the safety car and the field go by, then you all go back on, maybe add an extra lap if we still have to clean it up. They even have the rule for a red flag. Now, the situation in Las Vegas did not warrant a red flag, in my opinion. But even then, they have the procedures of bring the red flag, then restart the race. They have the options, they have the ways to do this better. I get it. There's a lot of moving pieces, different personnel, because every track is a different group of volunteers. The marshals, they do what they are told to do, and they do their best job possible. It's up to race control to ensure that while they're out on the track, they're kept in a safe environment. If race control is allowing this to screw up and not watching their back, I bet you those race marshals are probably frustrated. Like, why didn't anyone tell us to come in? Why didn't you say anything? That has to be a frustrating experience for them as well, too. Overall, they have the tools, they have the resources. They just got to better implement and just in general, better pay attention to what's going on the track. It's a virtual safety car. It should have not occurred. And hopefully we don't have an incident where then we see drastic changes. Of course, it's those drastic changes that will, at the end, bring safety to everyone's forefront. But this is the opportunity for F1 to be proactive and prevent such a tragedy from occurring. Now, Kobe, of course, the double podium finish for Mercedes, that's a big deal. Particularly, not really for George Russell, who, quiet day, was second place, lost it to Lando, but regains it again with the disqualification. But a big day for Kimi Antonelli. 17th on the grid. Even got a penalty at the start of the race for just moving the slightest amount on this grid spot. And he comes to finish third place. Compared to the driver he replaced, Lewis Hamilton, managed 20th to, well, now an 8th place finish because of the double disqualifications. Has Kimi Antonelli silenced the doubters, and he's now ready to show he is racing for podiums each and every week, including the sprint race coming up.
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen a lot of growth from Kimi Antonelli from the start of the season to now. And I mean, at the start of the season, Kimi Antonelli, he really looked the part. He looked like that he was worth all this hype, of having him skip Formula 3, just spend a single year in F2 when it really looked like he could have, used another year of experience in F2, and they just moved him up to Formula 1. So he was in the lower junior categories in Europe, skipped F3, straight to F2 1 year. He did okay-ish there. He didn't set the world on fire, but but Mercedes, still wanted to move him up anyways into one of their F1 seats. They didn't try to stash him off at Williams for a year or two like they did with George Russell, to allow him to develop, with a team that doesn't have as much pressure on it. But they put him in at the senior Mercedes team, and just let him go. And I thought that could go one or two ways. It could either go really well or extremely poorly, for the young Italian driver. And at first this season, it was going really well, and it seemed like that made the right decision. Then once we got to the European part of the season, in the middle parts, Kimi really struggled, and it was really hard to see him having a hard time out there, and just trying to come to grips with F1. And then the contract situation, it took day to confirm like Mercedes were interested in seeing if they could potentially secure the service of Max Verstappen, because when a generational talent like Max Verstappen is on the market, like at that point, you don't care who your drivers are. You want to see if you can potentially land this talent in Max Verstappen. So it took a little bit longer than normal, and then we were wondering like who was going to be the odd driver out at Mercedes in the event that Max Verstappen, left Red Bull. I knew there was like a buyout clause in his contract and all of that, but it would have cost them millions and millions of dollars, and then obviously Max ended up staying at Red Bull, and then they got the deal done with George and Kimi, and then a lot of people thought Kimi might be expendable, but although he is, a rookie who I feel like that was rushed up to Formula One probably too soon. It seemed like, at one point during the summer when I was seeing comments, come out from Toto Wolff, the team principal. Toto, he was been a little critical of Kimi's performances and all of that. And I was thinking, Toto, if this kid fails, like you have nobody to blame but yourself, because you're the one who rushed him up the ladder way too soon, and you didn't allow him to grow. You just wanted to get him into Formula One as soon as he possibly can, probably over the fear that someone else would snatch him up, which I totally get. But I feel like that Kimi was really rushed up, and then not knowing if he was going to be able to perform well enough to have a job for next year. I'm sure that contributed to his poor form and all the mistakes we saw from him during the middle of the season. But it seemed like once the contract thing was figured out that he was coming back for next year, it seemed like he settled down a little bit, and that's when we really started seeing the progress. But I think the contract situation and his struggles, really weighed heavily on this young kid's mind, that if he didn't go out there and perform, that his Formula One stay could potentially been very short, like what we saw from Mick Schumacher in his F1 career, which was really short lived, and he still hasn't been able to find his way back into the pinnacle of motorsport. But he can't able to do, and I think he's on path to potentially end the 2025 season on a high note. It was really nice to see him rebound from a poor start to the race and all of that, and then he ran I believe 48 laps on the hard tire, I believe it was the hard tire compound, which is extremely impressive. I know he had a 5-second time penalty there at the end, but because in order to offset the time penalty, they decided to do this strategy of running long. I know that his tires were extremely worn and all of that, but he was able to stay out on the track, and he managed his tires to perfection, and a good result at the end of the day. And not everybody can do what Kimi Antonelli did in this race. It takes a lot of talent and skill to be able to manage extremely worn out tires and see the end of the race and finish where he did. So Kimi deserves a lot of credit for a wonderful drive.
A very stellar drive. What an effort by that young driver. And I remember when we were on the program and all the pressure was coming. It's like, yeah, Toto Wolff, you rushed him up here. This is sort of on you too. You got some role in this. But if Kimi Antonelli continues this, I think he's somebody to watch for in Qatar. 2026, everyone's going to have to learn that new car. Let's see how he looks. That could be a great opportunity for this young man to do some spectacular things. Now, along with the double podium for Mercedes, another key thing that occurred, double points finish for Haas F1, which is now ahead of Aston Martin in the constructor standings. Now, BBC Sports reported that Aston Martin is potentially set to sack F1 team principal Andy Cowell. This short list of candidates that could replace him includes Christian Horner and Andreas Stellis of McLaren. In only 1 year as a team principal, Fernando Alonso is 13th in the points with only 40 points. Lance Stroll is 16th in the points with 32 points. A big fall from where they were when we were seeing Fernando Alonso contend for podiums, where it looked like they were going to beat that next team up there with the big boys of Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes. But now they're behind Haas F1 in the standings. They're behind Williams, which is having a great year. They have clearly slid backwards. Is Andy collateral damage, or is he really just not delivering this year?
Well, when you look at these situations, Joe, and when you have certain amount of expectations and those expectations aren't met, at the end of the day, somebody has to be blamed. That's just the way of life. Even if it's not necessarily his fault, they're gonna have to hold someone accountable. And it seemed like that their current team principal Andy Cowell is gonna be the one, where he's gonna have to be forced to fall on the sword in this situation and blame for Aston Martin's not so good season. And looking towards next year, I think next year is where everyone's going to be really looking towards 2026. They got Adrian Newey. He's going to be designing Aston Martin's car, and look at all the cars that he's designed in the past with Red Bull that have gone on to win many races, and drivers and constructors championships over the years. So it's going to be fun to see what an Adrian Newey designed Aston Martin car looks like next year, for Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, and see if Aston Martin could, take a huge leap up the grid in the year of new regulations. And given the fact that they have Adrian Newey designing this car, it would not surprise me if Aston Martin, becomes a regular finisher next year compared to, what has happened this year, and it would be unfortunate, to see that happen, to see the team take a huge rise, and then then Andy Cowell is out, and then it makes you wonder why on earth did they get rid of him, or maybe his vision, for the future of this Aston Martin F1 team is different, than what some others, want. So it could very well be a power struggle going on within the organization, but behind the scenes. But Christian Horner, as controversial of a figure that he's become, in the last several years or so, for some of the stuff that went on at Red Bull, some of the toxic stuff, and then obviously the scandals that was going on, at Red Bull. And, especially, towards the end of his tenure as the team principal, where it seemed like that Christian Horner during this first half of the season, it seemed like that he was just dragging down the team and that he was the problem. And then, then when you have Laurent Mekies come in and Christian is out, then the team started, to make progress. And then it looked like maybe he was the problem. But just because, Christian's, tenure at Red Bull was not so great towards the end, that doesn't discredit, all the great work that he was able to do. He helped build this team from the ground up and turn it into what it is today. So Christian does deserve credit, for turning Red Bull, into a powerhouse in Formula One over the years. And it's kind of like, I know I keep going back to, some of these stick and ball sports examples. It was kind of like when Andy Reid, was with the Philadelphia Eagles in a way. Yeah, where he did have some success with the Eagles. But, it got to a point, where the message has gotten stale, and then it's time to move on. And then he goes over to the Kansas City Chiefs and, wins multiple Super Bowls and, starts a dynasty over there in the NFL. So I'm not going to say that's not to say that Christian Horner would, potentially go to Aston Martin and then turn it into a world championship winning organization. But I certainly think that, when you look at all the success Horner's had with Red Bull, that maybe a fresh start, it was obviously needed from the side of Red Bull, but I think it was needed for Christian Horner as well. I think if Christian Horner was able to come in, as a new team principal, Aston Martin, I wouldn't doubt his abilities to build that organization into a much competitive organization in the future, possibly one that can go out there, and be more competitive and potentially join some of the top teams, in Formula One in the future. But it will certainly take some time. But I think Christian Horner, once he gets his fingerprints on that team, if he's chosen to be the new team principal at Aston Martin, I think you see a lot more from that team given from what you've seen, under the leadership of Andy Cowell. I know Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, he has some high ambitions for Aston Martin in the future. I know they built this new state-of-the-art factory, and with a lot of resources where they invested, millions and millions of dollars, to try to catch up to some of the big teams in Formula One. So they've gone all in and spent a lot of money to try to, turn this into a top flight F1 team, and you need top flight leaders. And when you look at Christian Horner's record, I can say he is that guy. And maybe his addition to Aston Martin, could be, a really good thing for the organization if they decide to move on from their current team principal.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with Aston Martin. A ton of resources in that organization. You got Adrian Newey there. I think that could bring in a lot of people that are capable of helping that team get to the higher up level. I will say, though, you have to at some point look at your drivers. Fernando Alonso's getting up there in age. Does he bring a lot of resources, experience? Yes. Maybe he also brings some sponsorship money. Your other driver, Lance Stroll, is he really still the best driver to be in that spot? I'll leave it at that. Now, one driver who is feeling like he is just having the worst season in his career, Lewis Hamilton, had a dreadful weekend. 20th in qualifying. 10th in the race, but then the McLaren double disqualification promoted him up to 8th place. Kobe, he said this is the hardest year in his career. And you pointed out he has even suggested that 2026 is going to be also another hard year. He does have a multi-year deal with Ferrari. Could this point to 2026 potentially being a farewell season for Lewis Hamilton?
I'm not sure if it's going to be a farewell season for Lewis Hamilton, but I've never seen Lewis Hamilton at such a low point, as we've seen him at this year, because Lewis has always, been positive about things, and upbeat, but it seemed like, this year, as we've gone later and later into the year, Lewis has been just overwhelmingly negative and down on himself. Like, I know we always like to say that, when you've had a bad day, the best thing about tomorrow is that the sun comes up every day and that you can, start fresh, and move on from the bad things that happened. But it seemed like, based on what Lewis Hamilton said, it seemed like from his perspective that, that the sun don't come up every single morning, and that, things are not going to get better anytime soon. And that's really sad to see. If kind of like he broke Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari, it seemed like that Ferrari is in the process of, being at, I'm not going to say the Ferrari team in general, but I think just being at Ferrari right now, we're seeing the process of that, breaking Lewis Hamilton as well, because we've never seen him, struggle, this much in Formula One. And this year, he said it can be a complete nightmare, worst season of his entire F1 career, and we know the later years at McLaren, I'm not McLaren, the later years at Mercedes, are not really the best, and then you move on to Ferrari, hoping that he would catch on there. But it's been a struggle for Lewis throughout the year to try to match his teammate, Charles Leclerc. And we've always said that 2026 was going to be the big year, the big tell-all year for Lewis to see like what he could potentially do at Ferrari. And obviously, we're not going to know anything about the 2026 cars under the new regulation set for like a couple of months now, when they start doing, the team launches and all of that, when we're going to start learning more details about these new cars. But obviously, the drivers behind the scenes, they're going to know what the car is like. So maybe Lewis knows something that we don't know, and, doesn't feel confident with the car that Ferrari is going to bring for next year. And if that's the case, Joe, it would not surprise me if 2026 is a farewell season. So I think if Lewis gets to the grid next year and it's still horrible, and we get on later into the season when they're starting to, build the 2027 car, and it looks like that's not going to be promising either, then it would not be a surprise to see Lewis Hamilton bow out of Formula One. But here's the thing that I'm wondering. We talked about next year being a farewell year for Lewis Hamilton. I wonder, like, if he's really this down in the dumps about Formula One, could Abu Dhabi in 2 weeks potentially actually be the farewell for Lewis Hamilton? Could it come a lot sooner than we're all expecting? Because he seems really down on himself. And I'm thinking, looking at Lewis's legacy, he doesn't have anything else to prove in Formula One. At this point in his career, he's going to always be a legend of the sport. We're always going to remember, all the good times he had. If there are no more good times left to be had, like, I would not blame him if he, just decided to say, you know what, we're going to figure this out, from a legal perspective, get me out of my contract. But like 2 weeks in Abu Dhabi, I'm done. Like, I'm just completely done with F1. I'm going to retire and go on into the sunset. So I would understand if Lewis, wanted to call it quits at the end of this year. But I think he's going to at least attempt next year. And if that doesn't go well, I think he'll be done by the end of 2026. But I would not be surprised if it happens a lot sooner, potentially, at the end of this year.
It could be something like that. Formula One is not exactly a motorsport where you have a farewell season like you see in other series, where Mario Andretti, Kevin Harvick, Jimmy Johnson have all had that season where next year's my last year. It's a celebration of my career, and then they ride off into the sunset. It tends to be, even Michael Schumacher case. After he won the Italian Grand Prix, this is my last year. I'm going to be replaced. Of course, he came back with Mercedes later on. But then it was just, hey, he's calling it a career. Lewis Hamilton's coming in Mercedes. Not exactly a big farewell. Just the nature of the sport, whether it's racing for your career, racing for your championship, racing against your teammate. I think of the term, and this was used back in, I believe, 2001, 2002 for the Winston, and it was survival of the fastest. And I feel like in Formula One, truly is survival of the fastest. If you're the fastest, you're getting that preferred strategy. You're getting that preferred setup. You are the person to beat. You are contending for those championships. When you're not the fastest, then you're fighting for survival. And that's just the story of Formula One and all major motorsports. Of course, the grid ranking follows Formula One and 6 other racing disciplines. Let's just check out week 34. We're getting down to it. Because of the double disqualification, Lando Norris has dropped down from the top 5 to 6. Look who's right behind him. Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen, all within striking distance of your 3 Formula One drivers, 6, 7, and 8. Not much change in the top 10 because nobody else was racing. But the big key for next race weekend, Sebastian Ogier, must-win situation to claim second place in the grid ranking. If he does not win the race, Marc Marquez will claim second place in the grid ranking. Of course, this is Marc Marquez's dominant season, but he had missed the final few races due to an injury. Taking a look at the rest of the grid ranking, as you see George Russell 18th. You have as well Charles Leclerc in the grid ranking down to 33rd. Not much change at all, really, but the big key is the 3 F1 drivers in the top 10 with 3 races remaining. So a lot could happen with the 2 Grand Prix and the sprint race at Qatar. Well, that's going to do for our show, but Kobe, we still have our shining moments to share.
Yeah, Joe, time for our Grit One shining moment from this racing weekend. Let us know down in the chat, whether you're watching here live on replay, what's the one thing that stood out to you? And there wasn't really much to choose from this year. Only had one race that we were covering, the Las Vegas Grand Prix. But there were several things where I think people could choose from. So Joe, I'll start with you. What's your one shining moment?
My shining moment, honestly, coming from the Las Vegas Grand Prix, has to be the effort by this Haas F1 team. Haas F1, this team has had a very, very unique history. They started off, of course, with Roman Grosjean getting points in their very first race. It looked like this team might be able to bring something, but then the Rich Energy scandal occurred. And then for the longest time, this team was just nowhere, the back of the pack. People questioning about the legitimacy of this team. Then, of course, we had that scary wreck with Roman Grosjean. And I felt like that might have been a little bit of a turning point with Haas. We knew Roman Grosjean was on his way out, as well as Kevin Magnussen. But a lot were still unknown about what was going to be next for this team. This team has slowly been getting things better and better. And this year, when they announced they were going to have Esteban Ocon as one of their drivers, I think a lot of people thought, let's see what he could do. Yes, he's gotten the win with Alpine. He got a podium last year, a double podium, in fact, with Pierre Gasly, but can he really bring in anything? And then Oliver Behrman. Okay, he had a great substitute performance at Saudi Arabia when Carlos Sainz was out, scored points. Was that just because he was in the Ferrari equipment, or does he really have something? Look what this team has done. They have started showing potential. Points here and there. We've had races where Oliver Behrman is outperforming Esteban Ocon, clearly showing he has talent. They now got a partnership with Toyota Gazoo Racing. It's interesting to see where that's going to lead to in the future as more people are investing in F1. And now this team, they are ahead of Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship. Aston Martin, which, of course, Fernando Alonso, he has done a lot for that team. We had seen that team before get podiums, do well. Yeah, they're not doing that great, but still, you look at what they have done to get around them, the Haas F1 team. 73 points. They are behind the Racing Bulls team, which I think a lot of people could say are doing phenomenal this year with Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson since he came back. And Williams has really turned the page. So it seems like Haas F1 is no longer that backmarker team anymore. Mid-pack, yes. If they could continue improving, of course, there are going to be a lot of changes next year. Sauber is going to become Audi. Aston Martin's going to have new lineup plus Adrian Newey design, a new car. But they could keep this up. I think this could be a moment for Haas F1 to say, now it's time to take that next bigger step and show what we could do as a team. So Haas F1, their double points finish at Las Vegas is my shining moment.
That's a great shining moment, Joe. And I think my shining moment, I'm actually going to give it to Max Verstappen and Red Bull for continuing to do what they're doing. Right now, they're seizing on all the momentum right now, and McLaren's failure to execute races, and they're just they're just letting the good times roll. It seems like that they aren't even feeling any pressure right now. They're just going out and doing their thing. They're giving Max a car good enough where he can go out there and show the type of talent that he has behind the wheel and get the job done. And it's really crazy where they were at the start of the year compared to now, because Max, we were joking that this Red Bull was a tractor, that he was, struggling with it so badly. But during the second half of the season, you have to give kudos to Red Bull for persevering and continue to improve this car and give Max something that he can work with. Because if you give Max something he can work with, he can make magical things happen. And what we're seeing right now from Max Verstappen has been truly magical, that he's been able to go out there and contend with this car. Because look where his teammate Yuki Tsunoda is. Like, Yuki's in a completely different zip code, far behind Max Verstappen, and he hasn't even come close to matching Max at all, this season. And Max he's just going on quite a run right now, where if everything aligns perfectly and then McLaren continues to beat themselves, Max very well could be the champion this year. I know after the last few races, Max, he was thinking like, yeah, I'm probably out of it. And then after the penalty to both McLaren drivers, he's in it again. And Max, if he continues to have his current mindset, we're not really putting pressure on ourselves to go out there and fight for the championship and just letting everything fall where it may. Max may very well still a championship this year, which will be a massive story and probably should not happen given how strong McLaren have been throughout this year. But it seemed like Max and Red Bull, they're operating under the mentality of, why not us? We know they're not underdogs. Obviously, they're certainly not underdogs in the least. But I think this why not us, quiet, cool, and collective mentality is really feeding into their favor right now in this championship battle. And Max needs to have a couple of more weekends where everything is going right. So if he can finish ahead of the McLarens and have them, run into some trouble, he very well could end up taking this year's championship, which is really crazy to think about. Imagine at the midpoint of the season, like you mentioned, Joe, when he was 104 points behind, that we'd be talking about Max Verstappen making up the ground and potentially still in that world championship right out of the hands of McLaren.
That's going to be the ultimate story of the year, in my opinion, out of any of this series points championships in the grid ranking. If he does that I think it was going to be the one that is like the biggest comeback of any sport. But definitely the headline story, I think, of 2025 when it comes to championships. We want to thank our Patreon investors, Colin DeShow, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, and Crystal, for investing in the Grid Network. Link in the video description so that way you can invest in us as well. Definitely want to encourage everyone to subscribe, hit that bell icon. Wednesday Grid tonight. We're going to have the latest motorsports news from around the world. And of course, we encourage everyone to visit gridnetworktv.com and across social media at Grid Network TV. There will be posting, of course, updates, including the Grid Endurance Performance Index, where Oliver Gray is your 2025 champion. Alex Palou is a Grid ranking champion, so we'll have the 2025 highlights up. And the off-season is coming around the corner. But even next month, just a couple of weeks away, 2026 Formula E season will start off, and a brand new pick a winner for 2026. So, Kobe, our opportunity to maybe get that championship and pick a winner in 2026 will begin. For Kobe Lambeth and for Grid Tonight, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time.